Fire Marshal, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Awesome, thank you, Brian. Mr. Carper. Good morning. Well, as Mr. Carper was saying, my name is Mark Crooks. I've been pretty much a lifelong Burlington, West Burlington resident. And I went K through 12 out at West Burlington schools. And I don't know, do you guys watch a whole lot of TV? Do you watch TV shows kind of like Chicago Fire, Chicago PD? Some of you do. Well, back when I was in middle school, and I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but there was a TV show called Emergency. Has anybody ever heard of Emergency with Johnny and Roy?
Every one of these better heard of because I talked about it.
Okay, good.
I used to watch it.
Good. Well, good. So I did too, quite a lot actually. But the TV show Emergency was about two LA County firefighter paramedics. They were just trying to get the paramedic program going. Paramedics was non-existent, including in Burlington back in the 1970s. Actually, Burlington Fire Department didn't take over the ambulance until 1969, and that was a basic CPR first aid kind of a deal. They didn't get their first EMTs until the mid-1970s, and then paramedics didn't actually come along until like 1979 or 1980. So paramedic program is really not all that old if you think about it in those terms. But I watched the fire department or the emergency TV show pretty much regularly every day. And I always had in the back of my mind that I thought, maybe, that might be a career, that might be something that would really interest me. So other interests that I had at that time were in scouting, but also I just like to volunteer and be able to go out and be around other people, keep my time occupied that way. And it was probably my freshman year in high school when the head custodian, Kenny Beanblossom, we were sitting there talking about the West Burlington Fire Department. And he had mentioned to me that they had what at that time they called a junior firefighter program up there where kids ages 14 and above could come in and participate with the fire department. They actually could go to trainings, they could help with the fire trucks, they get to know the firefighters, they could do everything but go out on calls. And so I talked to my parents and they were okay with it, so I joined the West Burlington Junior Firefighter Program. Today, that's called the Explorer Program. West Burlington and Burlington both have Explorer programs. The biggest differences is that you go down and you take a minimum type of training, which that includes some first aid and some CPR, and then you actually get to ride on the fire trucks and you get to ride in the ambulance, you get to go on calls. That's really about the biggest difference between how it is today versus when I did it back in 1980. So I was hooked. I really enjoyed being around the firefighters. I enjoyed being around the fire equipment. I was able to learn a lot. It also gave me I was able to work my way up, and in that program they were able to have a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and so forth. So I was up in the leadership as a 15-year-old kid. When I turned 18 years old, I actually joined the ranks of the fire department, the volunteer fire department, and I worked part-time for my parents who owned a small propane business here in Burlington. And not knowing quite what I wanted to do in life, didn't know if I wanted to go into business, didn't know if I wanted to go to college, didn't know what I wanted to do. But the one thing that I really enjoyed and I put a lot of my time in was the volunteer fire department. So I ended up taking a first responder medical class, then I jumped into EMT, and I really, really enjoyed doing that. And I think a lot of it is there's an adrenaline that comes about when you go out and you help somebody in their time of need. And I found out that was something that I really enjoyed, was being able to go out and help somebody in a time of need, but it was that adrenaline rush when you go out and you have to kind of think on your feet really quickly. And so when I turned 18, I joined the fire department and I started going out on calls. I still to this day remember my very first house fire. It came in about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I made the second fire engine out the door. And the differences between a career and volunteer fire department, I'm assuming that everybody understands that volunteer firefighters don't stay at the fire station. They actually stay at home. They wear pagers. If there's a fire call, the dispatchers set off the pagers, and the firefighters get up, jump in their cars, and they drive up to the fire station, and then they go out from there. So, versus career firefighters, they stay at the fire station. We'll talk about the career job in here just a little bit. But as we rounded the corner, it was a mobile home fire. Do you guys know where Derby Furniture is now? Today? Well, back when I was in high school, that used to be a mobile home park. And all those homes and everything in there was just one great big mobile home park. And as we were going through the intersection where the Casey's is out in West Burlington, I can remember seeing flames that were about 20 foot high as this mobile home was fully engulfed in flames. That was the first time I had ever really seen anything like that, and it really got my attention. So that's kind of how I got going into the fire service back, and I started riding fire trucks back in 1982, and it was quite interesting. So like I say, I was working for my dad, and the Burlington Fire Department started advertising for some positions in 1988. And I was driving a school bus actually driving kids to sporting events, and I came over here to Burlington High School to attract me. And I was standing there talking to some friends of mine, and a Burlington firefighter was standing there, and we were talking about the testing that was going to be coming up. And I said, yeah, I'm not sure that that's what I want to do. And he really encouraged me to go give it a shot. So I went out and I took the written exam. There was about 179, 180 people that showed up for that written exam. And out of there were 79 people that passed. And then we went in for a physical agility test down at the fire station. I remember it was in July, and temperatures were about 100 degrees or a little above. And we're all wearing this heavy gear, doing some pretty physical activities as part of this test. And if anybody has any interest in knowing what the physical agility test is like, you can go to the City of Burlington on the fire department website, and down at the bottom there's a video link, and you can watch what the testing is. Well, the testing that I took is very similar to what they do today.
I'm gonna show them that tomorrow.
Awesome. So we did this test in about 100-degree weather, and out of that there were 30-some people that passed. And then we went in and went to oral interviews. I wish that I knew as a 20-year-old kid what I know today about going through interviews. But one of the things that I know today, because I have sat in on many, many interviews, but kids don't really, they don't promote themselves very well in their interviews. So my very first question to me that was posed by the civil service examiners was, in 5 minutes, no more, no less, tell us about yourself from where you were born to sitting here today. And that question really stuck with me because I was kind of, as anybody would in that situation, you're just kind of taken back, and you have to stop and think about, holy cow, how did I get here today, and why do I want this job? It was a 15-minute interview, and that took up the first 5 minutes. The second 10 minutes, the remaining 10 minutes of that interview was me sitting around just interacting with the civil service people at that time. And as it turned out, I made a list of 10. So out of that 180 people that took the written exam, they only took 10 people. It's similar today. They still take lists of 10, but they actually have 2 different groups of lists. Okay. So then the fire chief, at that point, there were 3 positions available in the fire department. And the fire chief can hire any one of those people. They can hire the number 1 person on the list or the number 10 person on the list. I was the second person hired. I have no idea where I was on that list, but it doesn't really matter. So I was the second person hired, and I was hired in September 15th of 1988. Little did I know when I walked in that door that I would be there for 35 years. Started out as a firefighter. I responded to more structure fires in my first year as a Burlington firefighter than I did the 4 previous years as being a West Burlington volunteer. I was hooked. Again, it come back to that adrenaline rush, being able to go out and be able to see people and help people in their time of need. So it didn't take long to realize that I wanted to do a little bit more. And so I completed my EMT at that point, and I jumped right into the paramedic program. Back in those days, it was not a requirement to be a paramedic. It was a volunteer type basis. And so at one point, there was 15 guys on a shift, but there were only 3 of us that were paramedics. And so there had to be at least one person on the or on the ambulance all times. And what I realized is that it was a challenge for me when I would go out to somebody. I would like to try and get their mind off of what their ailment was. So if we had an elderly lady that might have been having trouble breathing or might have chest pain or something along those lines, I would like to go in and I would like to look around the room and see if I recognized any photographs, or maybe they had grandchildren, or whatever the case may be. I would try to educate myself a little bit about what that person's situation was. And then I would start talking to them about, in addition to what their medical conditions were, about things outside of it. And it was a challenge for me to be able to get their mind off of it and make that person better from the time that I saw them to the time that I got them down to the hospital. Now, it wasn't always the case, but it was kind of interesting. Just something that I like to do. So my career at the fire department, I started out as a firefighter. Then I became an EMT. Then in 1991, I became a paramedic. And there were other little things down there that I did as well. So, the air packs that the firefighters wear on their backs, you have to have specific training. And at that time, they didn't have technician levels. So they started an air pack technician. So I was a CPR instructor, an air pack technician. I ended up getting into the hazmat program, and I was a hazmat technician for many years, CPR instructor. And then as my family grew and you realize that you have car seats, I became a car seat technician as well. So it was just different ways that I could grow in my career and keep me interested in the emergency services field. So, any questions or anything at this point? Okay. So back in 1999, I had the opportunity to be promoted within the fire department, and I took a position called captain. And in the fire department, the different layers, you've got the fire chief is at the top, breaks down into the deputy chief. And at that time, we had 2 deputy chiefs, and you had the fire marshal. But under the deputy chief, you have 3 battalions. Each battalion has a battalion chief, and then underneath them, there's 2 captains under each one of those. So I took a role as a captain. I was still working a 24-hour shift, and I was basically an assistant shift commander, and I was assigned to one of the stations. So I was in charge of an engine company and an ambulance crew, and we would work as teams. We would respond to different types of calls depending on what the call type was. At that point, I responded to a house fire over on Burlington Avenue. Burlington, you know where Burlington Avenue is?
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. So and this would have been in 2000. You probably don't remember that one. But at a house fire, we had a fatality. It was an elderly female, and it was a very unique situation where there really wasn't any fire damage. We found a small fire down in the basement that basically self-extinguished, but it burned long enough that it pumped the house full of carbon monoxide. And the elderly female that was laying in her bed, she passed away peacefully. And she didn't have any damage to her body or anything. We weren't even sure what had happened. So we called in the state fire marshal, who came down from Mount Pleasant, and we kind of worked this investigation. And at the time, I looked at the fire chief and I said, boy, I find this stuff really intriguing. So about 2 days later, I got called into the fire chief's office, and he says, you made a comment to me about fire investigations being intriguing. And so he said, how would you like to go to fire investigation school? So I thought, absolutely, let's go. So me and another captain, a few months later, we went up to Des Moines and attended a 2-week arson school, learning how to investigate fires. And that was a start of a whole new career for me within the fire department. So I started going out and doing investigations as part of my job as a captain. But in 2003, the city of West Burlington started looking for a part-time fire marshal. And I was not working a part-time job at that time, and I thought, what the heck, I'm gonna go learn this fire marshal stuff with the hopes of maybe becoming fire marshal downtown, because I knew that fire marshal was getting to the point of retirement. So I went in, I interviewed, and I got the job working. So I worked 24-hour shifts down at the Burlington Fire Department, and I went out and I worked about 14 hours a week in West Burlington doing fire marshal type work. Does anybody have any idea what a fire marshal does? What are the different types of things that a fire marshal would do? Obviously investigate fires, because I already talked about that, but what are some of the other roles, responsibilities of a fire marshal? Any idea? Has anybody ever seen me walk through the halls of the school? So I do inspections. There's four different major responsibilities. So we have investigations, but we do plan review. So this big construction project that's going on at the school right now, when I was still working downtown, I was working with Carl A. Nelson, the school district, the contractor, the architect, and we were looking at all these plans. We had to approve all the construction work that was going on. So this was about a 2-year project in the planning phases. So I do plan reviews for code enforcement. Then I would do inspections. And then I would come out and I would talk to classes like this and do pub ed. Those are the main responsibilities of a fire marshal. But in bigger departments, the fire marshal is kind of like a chief, but he also has different people underneath him doing different parts of this job. So Cedar Rapids, for example, the fire marshal has 2 fire investigators. That's all they do is investigate fires. They have 2 plans reviewers in the office. That's all they do is plan reviews. And then they've got about 5 different inspectors that go out and do inspections. And then there's a person that all they do is plan pub ed. That's all that they come to work every day, and that's all they do is public education material. So, but in Burlington, it's a one-man band. I was responsible for doing all of that kind of stuff, and even in West Burlington. So, in 2005, the fire marshal position came available, and I was gonna say something about the horse man, but none of you guys in here have no idea what horse. None of you guys remember Horace Mann Middle School, or have you ever heard of Horace Mann Middle School? Do you know where it used to be? It was over by the White House, yep.
I was there.
Yep. So, in 2005, it was in March, the fire marshal at the time, Mike Hartman, he actually was going through some medical issues, and he retired in May of 2005. And it was right before the Horace Mann fire actually occurred. And so I got promoted into the fire marshal position, and that was pretty much my first big fire to help investigate. And we had the state fire marshal down, and it was quite the ordeal. It was very, very interesting, very challenging. And that's one of the things that I found out in emergency services that I really enjoyed the most. So, so going back to how the emergency services has kind of affected my life, I've kind of talked about my progression and how I got to where I went up through the ranks of the fire department. But I actually met my wife in paramedic class back in 1981. She also was a paramedic for Henry County. And she served Henry County for about 3 or 4 years until we decided to start a family, and she went back to nursing school. So my wife currently works as a registered nurse out of the hospital. She works in the recovery room, so she wakes people up after surgeries. But we went on to have 3 kids, 3 boys. My oldest son, Andy, he is a firefighter paramedic with the Burlington Fire Department. My middle son, Nathan, is a police officer with the Burlington Police Department. And then my youngest son, Daniel, is 23, and he is in the sports business, and actually he's right between jobs, but he spent all this past summer down working with the Washington Nationals down in Florida at their spring training facility. So he's hoping to continue in that role somewhere, but he's looking for a new team because they reorganize it at the end of every year. So two of our 3 kids continued on into the emergency services field at this point. But there are some stressors that come along with having or being in the emergency services field. Anybody have an idea how it might take a toll on your life as a?
You see people die.
You do see people die. There are stressful situations.
Mental and physical health.
What's that?
Mental and physical health change.
Mental and physical, absolutely. So when I first started on the fire department, let's talk first of all. Firefighters, Burlington firefighters, and many of them across the country have this kind of schedule. But they go in at 8 o'clock in the morning. Some of them start at 7. But so firefighters usually go in, their shift starts at 8 o'clock, and they work a 24-hour shift. So they go home at 8 o'clock the next morning with a whole fresh new group of guys come in. So they go in the morning, they check their vehicles, they do station maintenance, station cleaning, that kind of stuff. And they handle calls throughout the day that might come in. Typically after lunch, they do some form of training. Might be classroom training, might be out working on the trucks doing pumping training. They could be working with a helicopter, they do some kind of training. It doesn't matter what it is. And then in the evenings, it's kind of like some downtime. And then anytime after 9 o'clock, provided that there aren't any emergency calls, then they can go lay down in the bed and go to sleep. When I first started in 1988, the fire department averaged about 3 to 4 calls in a 24-hour shift. Today, they're averaging anywhere between 17 to 25 calls in a 24-hour shift. So they still have the same 15 guys working, and then they allow 3 guys off to be on vacation at any one time. So there's a minimum of 12 people working typically. They staff 2 fire engines, they staff 3 ambulances, and 1 command car minimum. And so depending on the call that comes in, they may leave the ambulance at the fire station, they might jump on the aerial truck. Or they may have a case where they have 5 ambulances out all at once, and if you do the math, it takes 2 people per ambulance. So there's usually the shift commander sitting down there by himself a lot of times, and the fire trucks are sitting down there because there's nobody down there to man them. So it all depends. They as a typical rule, they have a incident commander, they staff 2 fire engines and 3 ambulances, and then they just take what's thrown at them, and they may have to adjust. So stressful, it can be stressful, mental and physical. So a firefighter going out on a fire scene, they have their heavy equipment. Some of that stuff can weigh up to 75 pounds. That's why during the physical training test that they give, they actually put 75-pound weights on you. It's a vest, and you have to do your physical training with that added weight on. So yeah, it's physically and mentally challenging at times. But also, if you're up all night and you go home the next morning, that doesn't relieve you of parent duties. You still have to make sure your kids get off to school. You have to make sure you have food at home for meals. So you have, you're doing this while you're tired, and maybe sometimes you have to try and catch a nap throughout the day. Police officers the same way.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, you worked night shift for I don't know how many years.
20 years.
20 years. And so, but the other thing is that your kids have birthdays, but you may have to work. So as a firefighter, you work a 24-hour shift, and then you have 2 days off. So today is Tuesday. The guys that are working today will work, they'll be off on Wednesday and Thursday, and they'll come back to work on Friday. Then they'll be off on Saturday and Sunday, and they come back to work on Monday. Anybody know what Monday is on the calendar? Christmas. So it doesn't matter if you work a 24-hour shift, you work a rotating shift. Just because it's Christmas doesn't mean that you automatically get it off. I work my share of Christmases. So with leap year, the shift that I was on as a firefighter, I would work 1 out of 4 Christmases because of leap year. Then when I got promoted to captain, I had to transfer to a different group of guys. I went to a different shift 3, and that shift worked 2 out of 4 Christmases. Just the way the calendar fell. So you would have to plan a vacation or maybe a trade or something along that. If someone had something more important, they could come in and say, hey, I'll work somebody's Christmas if they'll work my whatever. And so sometimes we work trades to have the holidays off. So, in addition, my wife worked as a nurse. She was working as an emergency room nurse at that point. So we would have to work and make sure we have daycare for our kids. Yeah, there's all kinds of different things that you have to think about. So we kind of talked a little bit about the fire marshal. Back in 2005, I took over as the city fire marshal. And that was a career that I had for about 18 years. And as we talked, different points, there was a lot of different fires that I investigated. I remember one of the first fires that I investigated was a house fire up on South Main Street. And actually it was on South 3rd Street. And we were pretty certain that the fire started in a power strip. The fire marshal, I was a captain at that time, but the fire marshal ruled it as being accidental. But it seemed awful suspicious because the homeowner threw all of she wasn't having any problems with the TV or any of that kind of stuff. She threw her kids and they went for a drive at 9 o'clock at night. And magically, while she was gone, her house started on fire, and it started in the power strip behind the TV. Well, about 2 years later, I responded as fire marshal up on South Main Street to a house fire, and lo and behold, it was the same lady. And talking with her, they had just left to go watch a fireworks display out by Danville, and they hadn't been gone more than about 7 or 8 minutes when someone called in their house was on fire. So it started behind the TV in the power strip. So how many people in here have ever experienced a house fire themselves?
I've seen it next to me.
About 3 of them, 4 of them. So how many people in here know somebody that's experienced a house fire? Several of you. So personally, I've never experienced one. I've been to many house fires, but I've not experienced one myself. But it's very rare for somebody to have a house fire, let alone to have more than one house fire. So we actually we pulled the previous investigation paperwork. We started going through it with a fine-tooth comb. They were trying to blame it on the Sanyo TV and the Microsoft Xbox. Well, when Microsoft Xbox, when that company gets blamed for a fire, you guys ever heard of the Federal Consumer Products Commission? So when they do a recall on something, a lot of it's because of something that has occurred. And in this particular case, Microsoft thought, do we have a problem with our Xbox? Do we need to investigate this? So they brought in fire investigators from around the country. So Microsoft was there, Sanyo for the TV was there, and I'm gonna make up a couple other companies. There was you had a VCR, DVD player, there's a whole bunch, and everybody had their own investigators there representing their cause. And everything was meticulously taken apart, it was packaged, and it was all sent to a laboratory in Chicago. And then back at the fire scene, we actually took samples of the carpet, we took samples of the floor, we took samples of the electrical outlets, everything. All of that stuff went to this laboratory in Chicago where we all met up there, and we meticulously went through, and I've got some pictures. I don't know how we're doing on time.
You got about half hour.
Okay, so I might go hack his computer and I can show you some pictures of some fire investigations. But what happened is they unfolded it, and everybody agreed. They looking at the wires, looking at different parts of the machinery. The fire occurred on the outside. It didn't occur on the inside of the Microsoft Xbox. It did not occur inside the TV. It did not occur inside of the VCR. All of the damage to those things were as a result of a fire outside. So then they did sampling on the carpet, they did sampling on the floor, and lo and behold, that stuff came back positive for some type of flammable liquid. Yeah. So ultimately, we did not have enough to charge, because we didn't know specifically who actually started the fire, but the insurance company denied the claim, and the male half of this was in the military, and ultimately the military police paid him a visit. So he lost his job in the military, the insurance company denied the claim, and as a result, these people will never ever be able to get homeowners insurance ever again. That's just part of the way the process works. There's a lot of things when somebody goes in and starts fires intentionally. Other fires that we've had, do you guys remember the First Methodist Church fire downtown on, were you working that night? Yeah, you
That
were.
was the first one I'd seen.
That's right.
My
Yep.
pictures actually show the 2 fires.
Yep, yep. So there's a lot of things when we're looking at fires. So that particular case, it came in as an automated fire alarm. So the smoke detectors and the heat detectors in the building activated, sending signals to the monitoring company. And the first one came in as a smoke detector or heat detector down in the kitchen. And the second one came in as a smoke or heat detector on the second floor on the opposite end of the building. But there were all these detectors in between that did not activate. So that was clue number one, that we might have had multiple fires start in there. Mr. Carper stated in his cameras and his car showed flames coming out of the basement level on the southwest corner of the building. And also we had flames coming out the windows on the second floor in the northeast corner of the building. And so there was no fire in between. Another good indication that we actually have multiple fires. If you're going to have an accidental fire, it's all going to be in one location. if we have multiple points of origin, chances are that that is not an accidental fire, okay? So the federal ATF got involved on that one as well. And they brought in about 30 fire investigators from around the country, and we broke all that down. We had fire protection engineers, we had canines, there was a bunch of people there, and we broke down every bit of the fire investigation into different roles. They were able to do 3D imagery with the plans that we had on file down there. They were able to take the church, reconstruct it on a computer, and they could turn it on its end. And they knew the fire rates of of everything inside there, and they were able to determine the rate at which that fire progressed throughout the church. And as a result, while we were waiting for those 30 people to arrive into Burlington, one of the local ATF agents said, let's go through all of the people that were arrested that night. And so we went through all the people that were sitting in jail that were arrested that night. And one of the sheriff's deputies, Doug Irvine, he works at the jail now, he was on patrol, and he caught somebody walking out of the building that is now Rendezvous. It used to be a Hardee's. He watched somebody walk out with a roast beef on his shoulder. That person ended up going to jail. So we actually went back through and we interviewed everybody that went to jail that night. It was just on a hunch. And as it turned out, that guy could not pass a polygraph. He could not count for his whereabouts that night for around the church. We were able to show that he had been in the churches before, and they got a search warrant for his apartment, and they went in and he had all kinds of religious hate material all throughout the apartment complex. They offered him a polygraph, he could not pass it, and one thing led to another. Ultimately, he pled guilty to 7 federal charges. There were 2 churches that were affected, and he was sentenced to nearly 40 years in prison for starting those churches on fire. So,
You tried to set the First Presbyterian one on?
Congregational.
Yeah, that was it,
Yeah.
Merriman missed the open window.
No, it was a First Presbyterian. The one, yeah, Congregational is on 3rd Street.
Yeah, Merriman missed the open window when we were searching it.
Yeah.
I remember walking in there and going, oh, no.
Yeah, yeah, because I was with you guys when we walked in that day. So anyway, fire investigations really was very intriguing for me. So, so I pretty much talked down. Can I jump on and I can show some pictures and we'll talk about some fire investigations.
Very long day for both of us. Yeah, so when I first pulled up on that church, I didn't think much of it. You know, I'm pulling up, parking in front, the windows blew out on me as I got out of my car. I went, oh, this is real fire. So of course, when I moved my squad car, blocking intersections so cars can't go down, I chose the worst spot to park because that was the way the wind was blowing. Covered my car in complete sun.
Is there any way we could turn out at least the first row of lights up there?
Certainly. Yep. Yeah. Then I had to respond after I got done working there, I got to respond to shots fired at Central and Angular. I ended up arresting the guy in the back going over the intent. Got home finally at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the guy said,
That church fire was one of the fires that I got called in at midnight on a Saturday night, and I did not get home until it was Monday morning. I was up for 36 hours. So this particular house, or this particular fire right here, was the one I was just telling you about involving the TV stand and the Xbox. So obviously the fire occurred right here on the wall. There was an entertainment center that was here. It had, there was a TV, all the different appliances. If you notice, like, I don't know if you can see it or not, but right down through here, we have some very unique burn patterns in the carpet. Especially right over in here.
I think I would.
A little bit closer view of the carpet, you can see we have like looks like maybe a liquid pour pattern over here. There's an example right here of the odd burn pattern. So what we do is we collect that, we put all these carpet pieces in clean aluminum paint cans. And those get sent to the laboratory where they get tested for flammable liquids. Here's some of the wires left over from all of the different appliances that were in there. Here's another very unique burn pattern on the carpet. With the carpet removed, you can see there's a very unique burn pattern right here in the wood floor. Again, very indicating a possible liquid pour pattern. You can, yeah, that is not normal. And there used to be a police officer in Burlington by the name of Mike Swore, that he served as a detective for many years. And one of his favorite sayings was, the things that make you go, You can see very unique burn patterns on the floor. Notice how the wood trim here didn't catch on fire, but the liquid that was poured in a bunch of time of fire kind of ran out behind the entertainment center, and this is how it burned. This is just a pile of fire debris that we had to dig out and sort through. We were looking for specific wires, cords. This is the back wall right here, and I'll show you in a little bit, but we actually took the electric outlet that was out of this, and we packaged that up, and we took it to Chicago as well. So, these sets of pictures are actually up in the lab in Chicago. You can see how they shrink wrapped all of it. This is some of the miscellaneous wires that we were not able to identify. But as you can see, during fire investigations, we try to collect everything, and heat can have different effects on different things. Some of you guys might be saying, how in the world do they know what that is? Well, anybody have an idea what this is right here? Nope.
Wiring?
That is a fused power strip, like what you have. Mr. Harper's probably got one here. Yep, he's got one here, that usually, so the little power strips that you put in behind your TV, that you plug all of your TV and everything in, that's what it looks like when it burns up. This one right here is a power strip a power charger to like an Xbox. So the fire did not start inside that, it started outside of that. This is the power strip, the remnants of the power strip. What they're looking for in the wires is for shorting. If a wire shorts out, it leaves a little glob of copper, like a little bulb. That indicates shorting. You can see here that the plug, everything is secured. Here's part of the wall that had the outlet in it. There's the outlet. You can see that the fire damage is on the outside. They actually cut it. They cut it in half. And so the wires that are inside the outlet are not damaged. So the wires, so they were able to rule out the outlet as being, starting the fire. You can see that here that the item is still plugged, or the power strip is still plugged in. This, I believe, is a VCR. And so if the fire would have started inside this, everything in there would have been consumed. You wouldn't have been able to see anything, make anything out. So the fire actually started outside of this, and what you're seeing is just a result of heat damage. So we were sitting in a room with about 7 electrical engineers, and all 7 of them agreed that the fire did not start as a result of any of the equipment that they had inside their entertainment center. That's probably the DVD player.
You see how they took pictures as they went along, opening it even? This way they show that this is how it looked like before it was open, this is how we opened it, this is what it looks like once we're inside. Exactly.
This is a house fire, apartment fire that we had out in, on Washington Street.
Old Greenway.
Yep. Anybody have an idea what may started this fire?
The gas, the stove was left on.
Yep. So we have to, so as fire grows, fire starts in one small area, and as it grows and gets bigger, it actually goes up in a V pattern. So you can see here that we have a lot of damage, like right down in here, and we have damage coming off in a V pattern. And we have really high heat above the ceiling up here.
Oh, that house right next to you. My dad knows who that is.
And so here you can see the letters off, and so you know that this valve is pointing straight up.
Did he die?
So keep in mind that
That's what he remembers.
they look different.
What
So
about his
this
dog?
one's off, this one's clearly on.
And that was not the original garage.
A lot of damage.
That smells horrible.
You can tell.
Ever smelled burnt plastic? It smells disgusting.
Yes, it does.
I can't remember.
The steam fire factory that melted the burnt plastic.
So I know that's hard to see, Eddie. What we were trying to take pictures of here, this was a presentation that I did on how to board up. So, I don't know if I can get that. This is a house fire that we had out in the county. This gentleman was burning weeds around his house, and it got into some landscape, and it actually went and started the back of his house on fire. By the time the fire trucks got out there, the fire was engulfed the entire structure. This is the back of the house. You can see how the roof is gone. We were able to salvage just a handful of items, but the board up company came in and they took pictures of how they secured this. This is the back of the house right here. He was actually caught this mulch on fire right up in here, and it went right inside his house.
Got a question over here.
Questions? Yes.
Have you ever put out a fire that was illegal?
Legal?
Yeah, like illegal, like weed was on fire, or on that flat explosion.
Yes. Actually, we had a house fire on South 10th Street. We had a house fire on South 10th Street, where a guy was cooking meth, using it was like a 2-liter pop bottle, and he didn't have it mixed right, and, well, he had it mixed wrong, I'll put it this way, and the 2-liter bottle blew up, and, it started the bedroom on fire that he was in, and, ultimately, we had the drug task force come in and they investigated as part of the meth lab, and he ended up going to prison he got charged with first degree arson because it was, the house was occupied.
I just asked if that whether there was a meth lab explosion in my small town, it said like almost half the time.
Yeah,
I'm lucky I'm even lucky.
yeah,
Very
yeah.
good. What are you sure you're lucky a few years ago? I mean, come on.
Any other questions? Anything that I can answer, fire department based, anything like that? Been talking quite a bit, so surely you guys have some questions on the fire service, anything at all?
Do you remember the fire that was right next to, okay, it was 2000, Burlington Avenue. Do you remember the garage fire?
I do remember a garage fire on Burlington Avenue. Did you start that?
No, but I lived right next to it, and it almost started by a space heater.
Yep. So, space heaters, they're good, they keep you warm in the wintertime, but they have to have proper clearance. So a lot of times people, they put them in a room and then they like to put a lot of stuff around them, and it's usually the stuff that catches on fire. And they plug those space heaters into power strips, and that's what happens to a power strip because they're not designed to handle the voltage.
Do you have any like fire dogs?
Fire what?
Dogs?
I have a lab. She's not a accelerant canine, but I've worked with several. I actually like to joke that I have a scar on my chin. Do you guys know where the Eagles Club is over off Mount Pleasant Street?
Yes.
Across from Community Field?
Yep.
Well, they have a big parking lot that's out front that used to be a Chinese restaurant. And we had a fire back in around 06, 07 that, in that Chinese restaurant, and it involved around the buffet table. And because of the dollar damage, I ended up calling in one of the state agents, and we got, just for kicks and giggles, we called in an arson canine, and they came down from Cedar Rapids. So Cedar Rapids, Davenport, Council Bluffs, they all have accelerant canines. And if you've never seen one of those dogs work, it's just phenomenal. They actually work on food reward. They don't eat like a regular dog does, where you put food in a bowl and they just go eat when they're hungry. The only time the accelerant dogs will eat is if they detect accelerant, and then they eat out of their handler's hand. And they eat probably 7 or 8 times a day. It's called food reward. So what they do is they go in, and this dog hit on 7 different locations in and around the buffet table, indicating accelerants. So every time the dog would detect something, it sits down and it won't move until he gets fed. So the canine, or the handler, then takes food out of a pouch and he feeds the canine, and then they move on to the next location. So then they take the canine back outside, they mark down each spot that the canine hit on, then they go in and they take samples from that area. And then they also go in and take samples from an area that the canine did not hit on. Then they line everything up outside. They might have, I think we might have had like 10 or 12 samples. And they had them arranged in a random order. And then they took the canine back through, and the canine hit on every single one of those cans. And again, he's fed every single time. He's just it's just regular dog food, but he just gets a small handful of dog food when he hits on something. Anyway, my jaw dropped when that dog hit on the accelerant, because we were not expecting that. And then we sent all those samples into the lab, and they confirmed that the canine was correct. And ultimately, that fire went down as a incendiary, or intentionally set fire. So I have worked with several canines. There was a firefighter, she's retired now, but she had 3 canines out of Davenport over her career. They were ATF dogs, and so she would travel all around the Midwest with that dog, with ATF. Good question.
Okay.
Usually canines are Labradors because of their temperament, and they're soft spoken, I mean, and they get supplements, they drink water. Jeff Schatzer was a state fire marshal out of Mount Pleasant. He had a yellow female. And he worked her for about 5 years as a canine accelerant dog. Then she retired and she went home and lived with them after that. Other questions?
How many fires did you investigate in your career?
Oh, boy. Anything from small stuff all the way up to some of the larger fires, probably 800 or 900, I'm guessing. We would average about anywhere from 40 to 60 actual structure fires a year. And some of those were you walk in, you verify what happened and walk out, might take a few hours. Then there's some that might take a few months. So yeah, probably several hundred.
It's kind of like asking a cop how many people you arrested.
Yeah, exactly. Tama. So in fire investigations, it's not what actually happened, it's a process of elimination. So if there's a fire, you keep your eyes wide open. You have to rule out little things like electric, you have to rule out candles, you have to rule out, it's a process of elimination. We were not able to eliminate 3 different possibilities. One of them was spontaneous combustion. We were not able to rule out that the girl did it intentionally, and we were not able to rule out electrical. So, anyway.
I was the first on that one too. That was a scary one.
Thank you, guys.